Update on the federal and state programs to plug abandoned oil and gas wells in Kansas. And we have Mr. Ryan Hoffman with the KCC. He is the director of some sort. So if you don't mind, Mr. Hoffman, giving us your title, that would be appreciated. And welcome to the committee. We'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am the director of the Oil and Gas Conservation Division of the Kansas Corporation Commission. If you recall, last year I did give you an update on where things stood with our abandoned well plugging program and the federal program. So today will probably be sort of an update to that information that I provided last year. On the first page is some historical information, and the most important thing that I would ask that you glean from this is just to see how our offices are divided throughout the state. In the information I provided, I break it out by district, and that hopefully that visual will help you so you can see where the districts are. As you can see on page 2, last year for our plugging using state funds, we plugged 93 wells for $1.224 million. And below that is a chart that shows what we spent our plugging and remediation money on other than plugging, and that's broken out by district as well. You can see we spent $16,000, $482 and some cents on these activities. And those activities are when we receive a complaint, maybe a farmer notices a wet spot in a field, or there's a puddle that's bubbling, so there's got to be something under that bubble. We're called out to dig it up and look and see what it is, and that's what we spend that money on. And then on page 3, I have some more historical information that breaks out how many wells we plugged using state funds for the last 20 years. And if anything should jump out at you on that, it is that the number is dwindling quite a bit. And there are several reasons for that. Some of it contractor availability, and I'll talk about that a little bit here below that chart. But one of the questions that I get most frequently is, well, how much does it cost to plug a well? And my favorite answer to give anybody is it depends. Depends on where you are in the state and how deep the well is and how it's completed. As you can see in the chart there in the middle of the page, it's broken out by district. District 3 is eastern Kansas. Those wells are much shallower than you would find in District 2, which is central Kansas, and then 1 and 4 are northwest and southwest Kansas. So those are deeper wells, and that's why they're more expensive to plug. And as you can see from that chart too, that the cost to plug wells is slowly creeping up as well. Last year when I spoke to you, I was somewhat hopeful because we were in the midst of a recruiting effort to get more plugging contractors to plug wells using state funds. We had 3 meetings in person and 1 virtual meeting, and we ended up getting 23 new contractors to sign on. That is a record for at any point in time in the program. It's more than double the number of contractors we've ever had available to plug wells for the state of Kansas. That's the good news. The bad news is we only have about $5.7 million to spend, so it's not going to go very far with all of those contractors. But we do have our new website has been getting some attention. We post all of the information out there so that it's transparent, people can find it. And then probably the most successful change we've made is the use of the Purple Wave auction site for our salvage materials. This is more evident when I start talking about the federal dollars and what we've done plugging using federal funds. And I won't belabor too much of the information on page 4 talking about the federal program. That breaks down the different grants. I will mention that the performance grants, we did finally receive some guidance on last week. It's 49 pages long. I hope to have it read, and I'll be able to speak more eloquently about that in the near future. But there are 2 different types of performance grants, regulatory improvement, and those are even broken down into 2 subsets. The bill says that we're eligible to receive $20 million if we strengthen our plugging standards, or we're eligible to receive $20 million if we strengthen our regulations to prevent wells from becoming plugged, so temporary abandonment, financial assurance, well transfers between operators. And then there's also a matching grant, and that's the one we just received information on. And there's up to $30 million available over the until federal fiscal year 2031. And there's a formula where we have to pledge to spend a certain amount of dollars more than we would spend plugging wells for the decade from 2010 to 2019, and they will match that amount. Then, as I mentioned, that's the one that we just received guidance on, so I can't speak too much in depth about it. The one that I'll probably talk the most about is the initial grant, and I was fairly excited when I was talking to you all about it last year because of the progress we had made. In that short period of time, we had plugged as many wells as we had in most years prior. Well, if you look at the map on page 5, you can see what we put out for bid. We initially started with 8 projects. We received bids on 6 of them and awarded 6 contracts. And the next page, then page 6, shows you how that's broken out to date, or at least through the end of the year. And you can see that from January 16th of last year to December 31st, our contractors plugged 1,914 wells. And if you remember that chart I showed you about the state plugging program, you'll realize that that's like 3 of our best years combined. And our contractors were able to get that done in 1 year, this year. I mentioned the Purple Wave website and how good that's been to us. You can see the salvage from these federal projects has yielded $624,000 that we were able to put back into the grant. So we initially thought we'd plug 2,295 wells. Because of that salvage and because our contractors and the 2 central Kansas projects came in under budget, we're able to add 218 wells to that number. And we're going to be able to plug 2,513 wells and spend $25.3 million doing that. Right now, most of those projects are closed. We have, you can see the purple one is still in progress, and the weather is going to keep them from finishing for a while. But for the most part, we're ready to move on and go to the next grant, which is the formula grant. And that'll be the last one I talk about. There is, before I talk about the formula grants, I do have a map here. This is something that we started to do, and that was we tracked the wells that we were plugging by regional advisory committee. We share this information with our oil and gas advisory, and in the process, this is, I would say, one of the subsets or groups of people that we will be reaching out to try and coordinate more of our plugging efforts with as time goes on. Finally, on the last page is where I'll get into the formula grant. The formula grant is styled just like it sounds. It's a formula. We had to provide how many documented abandoned wells we have, how much we thought it would cost to plug them, and then how many jobs were lost in the oil and gas sector during COVID. We filed that in December of 2021 and finally filed our application December 29th of last year. So it took 2 years after we filed our notice of intent to be able to submit an application. We are eligible for $33.6 million. This first round of funding is $25 million. They decided to phase it in. I'm not sure why or what purpose that serves. The hope is that there could be more money available, and they're looking to see at the states who are performing and using the money versus the states who aren't getting the job done, and then maybe being able to repurpose that money to the other states who have demonstrated they can use it. The map here on the bottom is what we're putting out for bid, and that shows the counties where we will plug wells. We think this $25 million will account for about 1,875 wells. We won't know until the bids come in. One of the things that I would note is the costs have gone up from our last bid, but also the wells that we're focusing on in this bid are worse than the ones that were in the initial grant. The initial grant was supposed to be quick. The timeline for the federal government application was 90 days. So we chose newer, more recent vintage wells that required less investigation, and these are going to be a lot worse, so they're going to be more expensive because there's a lot more uncertainty involved with what it will take to plug them. This week, Tuesday, we had our last in-person meeting recruiting contractors to do this work. That meeting was in Dodge City. Earlier last week, we had a meeting in Wichita and one in Chanute. And the people who have done this work are interested in doing it, but we're still getting more people interested. So that's exciting to us to know that we're going to have options. My hope is that we're able to get all of those wells plugged for $25 million when the bids come in. So that's an update on where things stand. Hopefully, I will have more information on the performance grant guidance here in the near future after I've had a chance to read it.
Thank you, Director, for your presentation. I'm going to ask you to get a little elementary for us, if you would, please. Plug abandoned oil and gas wells in Kansas. I'm going to ask several questions and let you jump in.
Okay.
Number one, I don't understand why they're abandoned. Are they just the companies are gone? And then why are deep wells more expensive to plug than shallower wells? And you implied some of them are more of a mess, and I'm guessing that means around the ground at the top of the well to clean up. And why, I just don't understand why there are so many in the state of Kansas. And finally, is this a federal requirement, state requirement? So I've asked a lot of questions, but you can just sort of elaborate on sort of all those areas, if you would, please.
I'll try to do it in order. I don't. It's. I left Wichita fairly early this morning, so we'll see. They're abandoned because there is no responsible party. We have a statutory process that we go through, 55-179, that delineates who can be responsible for plugging an abandoned well. So we go through that process. We determine if that person is around, number one, and if they are around, do they have the funds available to do that? And if they're not, then they become abandoned, and they become eligible to be plugged with state funds. There is also another way that wells are abandoned, and that is when an operator leaves. You mentioned, did they just leave? Well, if they don't renew their license, we issue a penalty order. The commission issues a penalty order on them because they did not plug the wells. They did not transfer them. They took off. If they don't have any financial assurance left, those wells, then the commission directs staff to put those on the state plugging list and plug them with funds as they're available.
I'm going to interrupt you right here.
Okay.
You said if they don't have the finances available. How aggressive are you or we in finding out if they actually do have, or is it just, I can't afford to do it?
We make them provide tax documentation to show income, and we search anything else that we can find, essentially to show that maybe they have other properties or other things that they're hiding the money in. With regard to the difference in the cost to plug the shallow wells versus the deeper wells, and then whether or not there's a mess around them, typically when I said the problem is downhole. That's where we run into issues, because then you require more rig time. You might require special tools to fish pipe out of the hole just to make sure we can get down to the bottom and plug the well properly. The shallower wells in eastern Kansas are mostly completed what's called alternate 2, which means they are cemented on the casing is cemented from the surface to the bottom. So what we would do is we would tie onto that, pump cement down out into the formation, and then all the way back up to surface. And because they're shallow, that's less cement. And the rigs are smaller. It doesn't take as much time to do that. So that's why they're less expensive. As you move west, you have bigger equipment that's there for a longer time. And when you plug those wells, generally speaking, you will remove the tubular goods, and you will then set a bottom plug of cement, then put some sort of spacing gel there in the intermediate layer. Then you would put another plug wherever you have usable water or a salt section or anything else that would be concerning that we would want to protect and keep any fluid out of. And then we would plug from the bottom of the surface casing or below the surface casing back to the surface. So there's more cement involved in that as well, and that's why it's more expensive. And in terms of whether or not it's a state requirement or a federal requirement, it's both, in the sense that the state does require you to plug a well after 90 days of inactivity if you're not going to file a form or do transfer it to another operator. That's the state requirement. The federal requirement is just basically they said if you want this money available, you have to demonstrate that you have abandoned wells and they're a problem and you're going to plug them. So I hope, did I miss any?
I asked so many questions. I don't know if you missed any or not. We'll continue on with some other committee members. Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And a lot of your questions, I was going to ask the same ones. And thank you for your presentation. I love that you have maps and an outline form, and it's just great. I really do appreciate that. I guess another Another question, Mr. Director, is what is the reason why we actually do have to plug these wells? Thank you.
Well, the reason that we have to plug these wells, the primary reason is to protect usable water. We want to make sure that there's not a conduit for any of the mineralized substances to either go up or down the hole. That's a fear, you know, you always think about something coming up into the groundwater, but you could also have a hole in the casing and your groundwater could go down the hole and be spoiled forever. So that's why we want to do that. That's the primary reason. There could be other public safety concerns if the well were leaking gas near a school or near a town, something like that. We would want to make sure that we get the well plugged.
Senator McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just follow up on a couple of these. One, on the PRP, it doesn't sound to me like, well, you say we don't know who they are or where they are. And I would think that you can go back in the courts or, you know, clerk's office and find out who's owned property clear back to homesteading. And so, I mean, they may not be an owner or they're an operator that you can't find, that'd be my guess. But it doesn't sound like that we penalize them or we're very strict about penalizing people that walk away from their pollution.
And I think there's a difference between who owns the property and who's the responsible oil and gas operator according to the statute. The statute defines the 6 categories of people who are, and it's more than just owning the property, and specifically even owning a lease on the property. But those people, they could go out of state, and other states' attorney generals are loath to enforce those types of enforcement actions. If we were to come into their state and say, hey, this guy left us with a bunch of wells, we know he's operating in your state, we need to be able to go after him. Generally, they won't do that.
Well, that must be it, that they're more mobile, because I think of other underground pollution that happens. I mean, we're pretty strict about that. People own the pollution as well. I have one more question, please. Thank you. I was looking at your maps, and I look at District 2, and and then I look at Sedgwick and Harvey County, and I don't see much activity at all in that area, or the Equisbeds, Walnut. And we have a huge pollution plume up there in Burton, Kansas, and you know, it's getting into everybody's groundwater for agriculture and things like that. And I know it's a different type of plume. You don't get to just drill down and plug a well. And I just wonder if you all have ever talked much about trying to clean that up and do a remediation project.
Sure, and if you recall from the Water Authority meeting in Concordia, that was one of the questions for our geologists was, you know, now that because last year we spent $650,000 roughly drilling 29 new wells to better understand the plume and better delineate which zones of the Equisbeds are contaminated. And as our geologist explained there, that we can, you know, you can kind of pinpoint a hot spot and say, well, we want to remove that hot spot. But the problem is when you start to pump that water out, you pull good water into the bad water, and then you spoil good water. And that there's not a good way to pump that low and pull it out without potentially spoiling the good water. And then there's also natural chlorides in the Arc alluvial. And if we start pumping too hard in that area, we could pull those chlorides in and further ruin the water. So I think it's safe to say that we haven't come up with a good idea yet, but part of our goal in drilling these new wells was to try and have those discussions, and we've shared that data with the Water Office, with KGS. It's something that is going to help decide if there is anything we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question and a follow-up, if I may. And
The floor is yours.
Director Hoffman, thank you for being here and your presentation. My first question was, how long do you allow an owner to go before requesting plugging or requiring plugging? Let's say they got 10 wells out there and one's not working. What kind of time frame are we looking at?
There's a regulation that controls that, and it's 90 days. So after 90 days, a production or operation of a well ceases, that operator is either to return it to service, plug it, or file a form to temporarily abandon it with us. That form, that temporary abandonment form, gives them basically 1 year of inactivity. They're able to file up to 10 of those in a row, And after that 10th year, they are forced to file a application and potentially go before the commission to demonstrate why they need to keep that well longer than 10 years since it's been inactive for 10 years. And then that application requires a mechanical integrity test to show that the wellbore is intact and not causing any problems.
Okay. My follow-up question is that when you look at your maps, you see a lot of them in eastern Kansas versus western Kansas. Can you kind of give me a definition as to why that is?
It's two things. It's history. I mean, oil and gas drilling started in eastern Kansas, and then it's based on geology and how you extract that oil. Because it's shallower, there's less surface pressure. You need more wells because to bring the oil to the surface, because you have to do enhanced oil recovery. So you have a lot more injection wells and a lot more producing wells in a shallower area. In central and eastern Kansas, the spacing requirement for an oil well is 10 acres per well. So if you imagine you draw a square around a well, there's 10 acre square, put a well in the middle. In eastern Kansas, it's 2.5. So you get 4 per one that you would get central and western Kansas.
Thank you.
Senator Straub?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your presentation. Are these grant funds available to both abandoned wells that are, completely abandoned, or wells that need to be plugged for the good players that are paying to plug their own wells?
This is only for wells that the state defines as abandoned. So if it had a current operator, it would not be eligible.
Additional questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Director
Thank you.
Hoffman, for appearing and answering questions for us this morning. Committee, we will now move to working a bill. And before we get to working Senate Bill 336, I realize a lot of people are still getting acquainted with myself as chair. I handle things a little bit different than a lot of chairmen do. When I recognize you to ask questions, the floor is yours. So if you need to ask additional questions, just keep asking. Now, if we're up on time or have a lot of questions, I might take the floor back from you. But once I give the floor to you, it is yours until you return it to the chair. So my point is, you don't have to say, Mr. Chairman, one more question. If I may, please, just go ahead and ask your question. And that's the way that I was brought up when I first got into the legislature in 2005. But again, the chair does reserve the right to take the floor back from you if we're up against the clock or have a lot of other questions of other members. Just so I think it makes it easier that way, and it keeps us moving forward. All right, now we will work Senate Bill 336. And again, the way that this chair will work bills, we will receive and make a determination on amendments prior to a motion to pass the bill out of committee. So if there are no amendments, then we'll certainly take a motion. But if there are amendments, we will go through the amendment process, working those. And then once amendments are either added or not added, we will then move the bill forward out of committee. If we run up against the clock, we'll hold it over until the next time. And so since we just had the hearing a couple days ago, and it seems to be a fairly quick hearing, I'm not going to ask our staff to review the legislation unless someone on the committee would prefer. And if there is someone that wants us to, I'm happy to ask staff to review Senate Bill 336. Seeing no requests, committee, what's your pleasure regarding Senate Bill 336? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have spoken with a few members of the committee and certainly our revisor, and have 2 suggested amendments. I think I'd like to start with the easier one, which is just kind of cleaning up our statute books. So this would be asking for this bill to include a repeal of KSA 65-34130. I made copies of that because otherwise, how would you know what you're repealing? Mr. Chair, I had asked the question about rules and regs during the hearing, and after that, took the time to read through the statutes we have regarding above and underground tanks, and came across this part of the statute which simply provides for retroactive reimbursement from the underground fund. And that is only for the costs of corrective action taken before July 1st, 1992, and the claims for reimbursement pursuant to this section must be submitted to the Secretary not later than December 31st, 1992. I was able to check with staff from Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and they have let me know, and I believe I forwarded that to you, that they were not concerned about having this removed from the statute.
All right, you have the amendment before you, committee. Any questions regarding the amendment as Senator Francisco has presented? It's pretty straightforward, simply striking a statute that's outdated. I see. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there any unintended consequences of repealing this? Is there anything else in here? I was trying to read through it quickly.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe not, and that's why I did check both with the reviser and the department to confirm that they did not see anything. If this all refers to actions that have to be taken on or before July 1st, 1992, it seems they've happened or they haven't happened.
Senator Straub.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just get that confirmation from the reviser herself?
Reviser Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Senator Francisco did ask me that same question. I did look into it a little bit and did confirm that the revisor's office does not think the statute is necessary any longer.
Additional questions? Seeing none, Senator Francisco, you may make your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this proposed amendment to repeal 65-34-130.
Is there a second to the motion? Second by Senator Ware. Discussion on the motion? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be voting no on this. I think I need a little more time to really make that kind of decision. I look at this. I don't know why that wasn't caught when we started, and there might be a reason for that. So I'm just saying that's going to be my position.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just say this is not directly tied to the bill that we have on training, but it is clearly tied to that act regarding the tanks. And we don't have a lot of opportunities to shorten our statutes. And I think when we come across something that is no longer necessary, it's just helpful to get it out of the way and concentrate on that part of the statute that we're still asking to be followed.
Senator Fagg, did you have something additional?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tanks are a big issue, and it's one of those kind of things that I think the simpler we can keep this and the way it was developed to us, the better off we are. So if that needs to be addressed, I would say we address that at a later date. That's my opinion.
Senator Kirshen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the only question I have is that on as we heard from the reviser, does the department want to have a response to this legislation to see where it fits? If you're okay with it?
In working a bill, I will not allow any person to come to the mic to address the committee. You're certainly welcome to ask the department any questions ahead of time, during, or after a committee. But I believe Senator Francisco has told us what the department has told her. So, and again, that's something that may be a little bit new to some committee members, is when we're working a bill, I'm going to restrict our conversation. I can always change it, but don't plan to ever change it, but restrict the conversation to committee members. If you do have a question of someone in the audience, you're welcome to get up and go visit with them outside or at their chair, as long as you do it quietly. But my understanding is that the department has said that this is a statute that's just hanging on the books, and there's no reason to leave it there, so they really don't care if it's left, or, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Senator Francisco, but they don't care if it's on the books or off the books. Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some of the same concerns with some of the other senators on there making a big change or whatever. And this one, I'm not so overly concerned with the idea that it's an outdated. We have a lot of things in the books are outdated, so I believe I'm going to vote yes on this one. Thank you.
Additional comments? Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there any other purpose to affect this bill other than just removing an old statute? And if that was the case, why wasn't other legislation introduced to remove a number of outdated statutes? Why are we messing with one fairly simple, short bill?
Senator Francisco, do you wish to answer?
I'd be happy to respond. This is a bill that is directed towards operators of underground storage tanks, and the bill itself really simply removes the requirement for permits being annual. Have a second amendment to address that, but just again, in reading through the statute, so I understood where permits are identified in the statute, I came across this, and I prefer to just handle it as part of a bill that it's related to than introduce a bill just to remove a single statute.
I think we've run our course on discussion on this. So Senator Francisco, do you wish to close on your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move my amendment.
All right, you've heard the motion to amend. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. We are on the bill as amended. And Senator Francisco, I understand that because you just told us you had another amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. And this is the proposed amendment that relates to the permits themselves.
Once the amendment is handed out, Senator Francisco, I will allow you to explain your second amendment. Looks like it's been handed out. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the bill, as introduced, strikes the words "an annual" in front of permit. And so it says that storage tank operators shall demonstrate that they have completed the training required by the department in order to obtain a permit for the operation. I understand that the intent is, instead of having annual permits, that they would have permits that lasted 3 years. So these permits, if we don't have a renewal of the permits, then there's no going back to make sure that those operators do have that training. So there's a lot of lines in here, but the first one I want to focus on is just, it adds the words "or renew" on line 21. So in order to obtain or renew a permit. The next part of that is that the legislature gives departments authority to adopt rules and regs. In this case, the authority is very broad. So the renew is one part of this amendment. The second part starts on the next page. It's the attachment, and this is on section 6534-105, and this is where the secretary is authorized to adopt rules and regulations necessary to administer and enforce the provisions of this act. So we could really just stop there, but they have gone on or the legislature went on to say, consistent with these purposes, the secretary shall adopt rules and regulations. And then they go through 10, more than that, 13 items. I am only suggesting a change, and this is page 3 of 4, on number 10. That would say, right now, that says prescribing fees for the following: registration, issuance of permits, approval of plans. And I'm just adding the words requirements and. So it's clear that in addition to prescribing fees, we, as a legislature, intend for the department to prescribe requirements for the issuance of those permits. And this directly relates to this change that we're making regarding the training. Be happy to stand for any questions.
All right, committee, you have the amendment in front of you. Questions on the proposed amendment? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I look at this, this was a simple bill, you know, and we've just absolutely made it complicated, in my opinion. And I really feel like that I'll be voting no on this one, that there's a lot of issues to this, and for us to decide this in 5 minutes, there's some other people and stuff I'd want to ask, and I'd rather say no and be happy with what was brought before us. And we went through the issues, so I'll be voting no on this.
Additional questions or comments on the amendment? Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would have to agree with Senator Fagg. There's too much here. It looks like it's kind of rewriting the bill, and I need to closely compare the two line by line. So if we can table this, or I won't be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of agreeing with the other two. The bill we had, what surprised me, had everybody already came to agreement. The bill was written, and I was fine the way it was. I think if we need to make another change like this, I just soon have another hearing and make a bill with it, and if we're going to make the changes. So I agree with the other two. Thank you.
Senator McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for Tamara.
Supervisor Lawrence.
Is this newly created language, Tamara, or is this just, it's talking about the 6534-105? And is this new language to define the rules and regs process, or is this just language to specify how that they will define and make changes in rules and regs? So I guess I'm trying to say, is this like all newly written language, or is this just to define rules and regs?
Supervisor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 1 of the bill, everything you see in boxes above the phrase insert attachment A would just change the title of the bill and not make any changes to the actual statutes. And those are just sort of technical requirements anytime we bring in a new statute to a bill. The same with the 2 boxes at the bottom. Those would not appear in any statute once it's printed. Those are just technical parts of the bill. Then when you get to the actual attachment, that is everything that is in black in the actual attachment is current law. The only words that would be added would be on page 3 in blue in paragraph 10, and it would be the words requirements and.
They're
Now,
not blue on our paper.
they're not blue.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Apologize.
The underlined words in paragraph 10 would be new requirements. And I will say that if this amendment were adopted and a new version of the bill were printed, the bill would be longer than 1 page because it would be adding a fairly long statute to the bill. So the bill would get longer, but with mostly existing law.
Current language, and only change is the blue. Okay, thank you.
Senator Francisco, you wish to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that there's often concern about this. I would like to divide this amendment to take the proposals in 2 parts. So the first part would just be to add the words "or renew." That would mean, I believe that the bill would just stay as 1 page. And all that we would be doing is saying that they have to complete the training in order to obtain or renew. So I'm a little concerned that once someone has a permit, then they feel that they can move forward. And I guess I am hoping the department and trust the current staff that they want to continue this process of training as part of the permitting process. But since we now are taking out any time frame for those permits, I'd like to at least acknowledge that we expect them to be renewed in some sort of manner, because this then doesn't require, doesn't require you to come back, just like the driver's licenses now.
All right, there's been a request to divide the amendment, and the chair will allow for, I think this will speed up the process. So part 1 would simply be on page 1. You will see about 2/3 of the way down, adding the words "or renew." That will be the part 1. And so these will be voted on separately, part 1, then the part 2 will be the rest of the amendment. Any questions on part 1? Seeing none, do you wish to close? I guess I need you to make your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the part of this amendment that simply adds the words "or renew" and changes to the title.
There is a motion. Is there a second? There's a second by Senator McGinn. Discussion on the motion. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I go back to the day that we had the hearing on this, and this affects a lot of people. And I thought there was a lot of thought that was put into this. Everybody was in agreement. I just have a problem us taking this and messing with it with the way it was presented to us. So I'll be voting no on both of these. Thank you.
Additional discussion on the motion? Seeing none, and again, just to reiterate, we're adding, if this amendment goes on, 2 words "or renew" on line 21 of the bill. All in favor of the motion to amend part 1, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. Motion carries. So we're back on the bill on the amendment part 2, which would be all the rest of the amendment handed out without the words "or renew" because they have already been added. Discussion on the motion to amend. Or not a motion yet, but on the proposed amendment. Seeing none, Senator Francisco, if you wish to make your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recognize that this would be the part that would make it more complicated. I have been sitting on rules and regs, and I know that many of the legislators on that committee are very concerned about have we granted the appropriate instructions in terms of what to add. I think this makes it more clear that we're asking the department to prescribe requirements for registration issues of permits, but understand any hesitation about making the bill in this way more complicated.
Go ahead and make your
But,
motion.
yeah, I move my amendment.
All right, is there a second to the amendment, Part 2? Seeing, there's a second by Senator Ware. Discussion on the motion. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does this, by chance, add, I know Tamara said this is current language, but does this add more authority to the secretary to change the application form or change the date requirements of when you have to apply for it? Because sometimes when you give authority to one person in control, they want to change something, but then it's difficult to disseminate those rule changes to everybody, because this does affect a lot of people. So I just want to make sure we're not messing all of this up and not keeping it as clear and concise as we can.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll ask our revisor to let the committee know if I'm not correct in what I'm saying. But currently, this section, the 65-35105, gives the secretary a great deal of authority. The other thing with regard to your question is, can the secretary change the application, or make those kinds of changes? The application is not in our statute, so they have that authority. They're doing that. So this does specifically say that they can make requirements with regard to the issuance permits. I was surprised because there is so much else authority that's been given in this statute that wasn't included, and yet we were talking about permits in the bill. So I'm comfortable either way the committee wants to go with this. If I think we do want to get the bill passed. I think and so if there's some hesitation that this is making it too complicated, I'll wait till rules and regs and see what they come up with there. So,
Additional questions or comments on the amendment, Part 2? Seeing none, Senator Francisco, you wish to move your motion amendment. Go ahead. Close on your amendment.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this second amendment.
All right, you've heard the motion and the close to amend Senate Bill 336 with Part 2 of the balloon. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. Motion fails. We are back on the bill as amended. Are there additional amendments? Seeing none, committee, what is your wishes with the bill? We can leave it in committee or we can pass it out of committee. That's the two choices. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would make the motion that we recommend Senate Bill 336 as amended to the full Senate.
Recommend it favorably.
Favorably, thank you.
There's a motion. Is there a second? There's a second by Senator Fagg. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor of passing Senate Bill 336 out favorable as amended, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you, committee. That was the extent of our agenda for the day. Appreciate you being here, and we're actually getting out just 2 or 3 minutes.